In the local cemetery, Mollendal, there is a small unmarked grave surrounded by a low fence and overgrown with shrubs. On February 5, 1971, a white zinc coffin was lowered there, decorated with tulips. At the ceremony, there were no sobbing relatives, no friends, no sad speeches about the deceased. The priest read a prayer and then lowered his head and said, "We must have buried her in a foreign country." Only 15 people attended the ceremony, all of them police officers, and the zinc coffin was chosen in order to preserve the body better. No one knew the name of this woman, her surname. No one even knew what she looked like when she was alive. They only knew how her body was found, and under what conditions she most likely died, and it gave everyone the creeps. The Isdalen Valley, the place where the woman's body was found, also has another name. The locals have long called it the Valley of Death. Back in the Middle Ages, people died there under mysterious circumstances, but even today, unfortunately, fatalities still occur there. On November 29th, the weather in Bergen was beautiful for late fall. A father and his two daughters, aged 10 and 12, decided to go for a walk in the Isdalen Valley. They were walking from the center of Bergen, and around 9 o'clock in the morning they reached the valley. Walking along the valley, the girls noticed the remains of an unburned fire, and there was a terrible smell of burnt tires. Leaving their father behind, the brave girls ran forward to see what kind of fire it was and what kind of smell it was. The picture they saw will remain in their memory forever. They will never be able to forget it. There they found not only the remains of a burning fire, but also the burnt body of a woman, lying between the stones with her hands clasped to her chest, as if trying to protect herself. Her clothes were burnt, and various things were scattered around, but the girls didn't notice them. They ran back to their father in a panic, and he took them aside. Since there were no cell phones in those days, and the nearest phone booth was in the city, the family rushed to the police station in Bergen. 3 local policemen arrived at once. One of them was Carl Harver. "We didn't know anything. What had happened? Where were we going? We found the body. That's all the information we got. On the spot, we saw that she was lying sideways. Her body was burned in front, and there was a smell of burnt skin. The crime scene was examined and no one had ever seen anything like it. It seemed that the woman herself was the source of the fire. Her burns were so severe. It was unclear how long she had been lying there, but judging by the position she was lying in, it can be assumed that she died of fire. There were a couple of seemingly random things scattered nearby, like 2 plastic bottles, most likely with water, a bottle of Norwegian liqueur, a wristwatch, rubber boots, even a fur hat was found, with traces of fuel, 1 drop to be exact. There was no more fuel anywhere. In addition, there were carefully removed jewelry on the ground, and 12 sleeping pills were found. When the police saw all this, they began to wonder who the girl was. Did she do it herself? And if so, why choose such a death? Fire is probably the worst way to die. If she didn't do it, then who did? And why? All the clothes were missing tags or any identification marks. The tags were cut off, the inscriptions were washed away, the stickers were erased. Did this mean that the woman did not want to be recognized? And why was this done? At that time, most clothes were not mass-produced, so you could find out who made each item, then go to the manufacturer and ask who your customers have been, and if they have ever seen women like this. Maybe an autopsy will answer some questions. The body was sent to Bergen and handed over to specialists, and the police hoped to get answers to the most important questions. How old was the woman? What did she die of? And when did it happen? The deceased was not known in the city, and the police did not receive any reports of missing people who would fit the description of the woman found. All that was known was that the woman was young, between 25 and 35 years old, about 174 centimeters tall, thin, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. Her ethnicity was clearly not Scandinavian. The news about the woman from Isdalen spread all over the country, and 3 days later the police were contacted by the Bergen railway station, where they found 2 suitcases that had not been taken, and these suitcases really belonged to an unknown person from Isdalen. She had put them in storage on November 23rd, 6 days before she was found in the Valley of Death. But unfortunately, the suitcases did not give any answer, but rather confused the police even more. How did they even realize that it was her luggage? It's simple. There were glasses in the suitcase with a well-preserved fingerprint on them, and it matched the fingerprint of the dead woman. Many things were found in those suitcases, such as wigs, cosmetics, coats, the glasses we have already mentioned, as well as a lot of high-quality clothes from which all the tags were cut off. There was also a map with railway stations from Oslo to Bergen, a compass, 500 German marks, which was quite a large sum for that time, a tailoring kit from a hotel in Geneva, and a fairly worn pair of slippers from Italy, as well as a prescription skin rash cream from Bergen, but the label with the name of the patient and the doctor who prescribed the cream had been erased. The only thing that gave the investigators any information was a box of matches with an advertisement for a postal service that delivers erotic lingerie from Germany. Another interesting discovery was a simple notebook in which several pages were written in letters and ciphers, a code that the police did not immediately manage to solve. They had to turn to a specialist from the Norwegian Armed Forces who worked with ciphers. The police continued to examine the contents of the luggage and came across a plastic bag from a family store in the city of Stavanger, which could be reached from Bergen by ferry, so of course the police immediately went to Stavanger to question the shop owner. Stavanger is a city where many oil rigs are located, where most of the locals work. In 1970, the city was quite unremarkable, and there were rarely foreigners, and if they did, the locals usually remembered them well. And so it was then. In the store, the girl bought a pair of size 38 rubber boots, the same ones that were found next to her body. This is how Rolf, the shop assistant, recalled it 2 years ago. The woman couldn't decide whether to buy the shoes or not. She walked around the store back and forth and looked at them in the mirror. She didn't look embarrassed. She was very calm. She came back the next day and bought them. The woman was well dressed. She had a pleasant appearance. I remembered her well. It's not every time you sell shoes and then the police come to you and ask about the client. So, the woman was definitely in Stavanger, and they even managed to find out which hotel she stayed in, a mid-range hotel located near the port. On November 9, 1970, a woman from Isdalen checked in under the name Fenella Lork, saying that she was from Belgium. She stayed there for 9 days, which was quite a long trip for a single woman at that time. The hotel remembered Fenella very well. She always had perfect makeup and did not look like the locals. She had dark hair and dark eyes, and the hotel staff recalled that she never smiled. What was the unknown woman doing in Bergen and Stavanger? Fenella Lork was seen and remembered in Stavanger, but when they started looking for a woman with this name in other hotels, there were no mentions of this name. Moreover, the Belgian police reported that Fenella's passport number did not exist, and they did not have a woman with that name and surname, so, as you can imagine, the passport was forged. Then the police decided to hire a specialist who could find out what other hotels she had visited in Norway. The result of the examination amazed everyone. As it turned out, the woman used 7 names and 7 different passports, all of which were, of course, forged. Most often, the woman claimed to be from Belgium, but sometimes she said she was from Germany. Here are some of the names she used: Fenella Lork, Alexia Zarna Meshes, Geneviève Francier, Elisa Betlenhover, Claudia Tild, Vera Jala, Claudia Nielsen, Vera Schlusnik. In addition to Norway, information about her presence was found in Paris and London, so it turns out that the unknown woman traveled all over Europe. And while the police were traveling to Stavanger, the results of the autopsy came back, and the examination revealed that the woman died from a combination of 2 causes: carbon monoxide poisoning and an overdose of sleeping pills. It is also important that the woman was still alive at the time of the fire, and this was found out thanks to the fact that in her lungs, they found traces of smoke in her lungs, meaning that she had taken at least 1 breath. Also, during the autopsy, it was found that the woman had never given birth, had never been pregnant, so she had no children. Unfortunately, there was not enough information to understand how everything happened. Did she do it herself, or was she simply murdered? The police were inclined to the second version. Since DNA testing was not yet available at the time, her jaw, several pieces of skin, and samples taken from her internal organs were preserved for future experiments. The police were confident that this would come in handy one day, and it did. Not long ago, the samples were sent for analysis, and we will talk about the results a little later. Let's get back to the hotels. In the hotels, the woman behaved very strangely. She rarely let the cleaners into her room. Sometimes she would take furniture out into the corridor, either a table, a chair, or something else, as if she was giving someone a sign. She also always asked for a room with a street view, and often changed rooms if she was not satisfied with something. Every morning she had breakfast with porridge and coffee and smoked long cigarettes. Now let's move on to the cipher from her notebook that was found in her suitcase. The cipher was very simple, as it turned out. Using letters and numbers, the woman wrote down where and on what dates she was. Only the last line has not been solved so far. See if you can figure out what this entry means. In 1970, according to her records, she was in Norway twice, the first time from March to April, and then in the autumn. In the Norwegian archives, there is a small folder with the case of a woman from Isdalen. And a few years ago, they found very interesting information. It turns out that in 1970, the woman was seen in Tananger, a small fishing village near Stavanger, where we know she spent about a week. A fisherman, his name is Burton Roth, saw her here, and according to him, the woman stood out in the small village. But what is even more striking is that she was not seen alone. She met with a Norwegian officer on the dock. After the fisherman went to the police, his statement was recorded, but for some reason it was not attached to the case, and the officer was not found. And the fisherman himself soon realized that it was better for him to keep silent. Here is how the son recalls their family trip to London in 1970, when 2 policemen suddenly stopped his father. There were 4 of us, the whole family gathered, we were ready to get on the train, and my father left with those policemen for 15-20 minutes. He talked to them and came back. He didn't say anything to us. We were thinking about it all the way. When we came back, I found out that he had a gun and a knife with him, which those policemen gave him for self-defense. He was advised to keep his mouth shut. What can this all mean? And why was this officer not wanted? In the meantime, an official statement was issued. The woman committed suicide. The case was considered closed, but no one, almost no one, believes that she did it to herself. But who was to blame? And why was the case closed so quickly? And who was she anyway? Let's think about why the fisherman was ordered to be silent. What was so secret happening in Norway at that time? That autumn, the Norwegian military was researching an anti-ship missile called the Penguin. And of course, new missiles aroused interest from the east. And so we come to the first version, that if the woman from Isdalen was a spy. I think that's the first thought of everyone who studies this case. And I also initially thought that we could close the case, but even if she was a spy, the case does not end there. What were her goals? And most importantly, who sent her there? And who killed her? The very first version, that the woman found in the Isdalen Valley was a spy, was leaked to the press. How else to explain the 7 passports, the wigs, the travels, the ciphers, the cut-off tags on her clothes? If she was a spy, her stay in Bergen was quite logical. At that time, missile tests were often conducted in Norway, and there was a NATO base in Bergen, which attracted many soldiers from different countries. The woman obviously had money. She lived in hotels. Her clothes were of good quality. Perhaps she was sponsored by some state to gather information, but for a spy, she attracted too much attention in her travels. Spies must blend in with the crowd, be invisible, and try to make friends with the locals. Absolutely everyone remembered the woman, and a shoe store clerk was even able to describe her perfume. As for the ciphers, spies usually remember all the information by heart, and sometimes they ate any papers to make sure that no one would find them. A spy in the past offered his own version, but what if the woman was not a spy but a courier? She could pass information, documents, meet people. Moreover, spies never write anything down. They really have a phenomenal memory. Were there many woman spies at that time? I don't think so. And are spies killed in this way? In full view of everyone. More often than not, they try to make the person disappear, and not lie in a place accessible to tourists, with a lot of things that can help the investigation. For a spy, she really attracted too much attention. She was remembered for life by literally everyone she came into contact with. And if she was a courier, then this could explain her movements. Perhaps she collaborated with Norwegian military intelligence and was a secret agent inside the country. This version can be confirmed by the fact that the investigation was very long. The witness was told to keep her mouth shut and was handed a gun. Why wasn't the case solved in hot pursuit? Then the question arises, why was she killed? There are guesses that the woman made some kind of mistake and lost confidence in her, but the method doesn't fit. Somehow she was treated in a very cruel and public way. Nevertheless, this version can be confirmed by the fact that several police officers involved in the investigation believe that their work was interfered with in various ways. This is what the granddaughter of one of them, named Cecilia, told the BBC podcast. My father told me that this case undermined my grandfather's confidence in his work. He was disappointed in it. My grandfather had a feeling that they were being prevented from working on this case. Then my father mentioned the connections with Israel, as if the case was closed after that. This happened after the police in Bergen took up the case, dug deeper, and found out about the connections with foreign intelligence. After that, the police were forbidden to investigate the case. This may illustrate another version that the unknown woman from Isdalen could have been an agent of the Israeli intelligence service, which during the Cold War searched for war criminals around the world. But how can all these theories be confirmed or denied? We can use teeth and DNA to find out where she grew up and how old she is. This was done 2 years ago. A specialist from Australia conducted a detailed analysis of the teeth, which is a rather complicated procedure, but it can help to find out quite accurately where a person is from, where they moved to, and where they lived. So the analysis showed that the unknown woman was most likely born in Germany, then moved to Luxembourg or Belgium, and for some time the woman lived in Wales. It is quite possible, as we remember, she introduced herself as Belgian and sometimes said she was from Germany. Another interesting fact was how old she appeared to be. Witnesses who saw her or communicated with her said that the woman was between 25 and 35 years old. But the analysis of her teeth showed a completely different result. At the time of her death, she was about 45 years old, which is 20 years more than everyone thought before the analysis. And so, we are moving on. We still don't know the woman's name, so how do we find out? The easiest way is to do a DNA analysis, and we were able to do it with her kidney samples. But DNA does not give us exact information about where a person was born or what nationality they are. And you can only find out the name by getting some kind of similarity with another person in her family, or with some relative. And by contacting them you could find out the name and surname. But there were no matches in the Norwegian database, and no matches in the Interpol database either. So there is only one hope with DNA, to wait until one of her distant relatives remembers the long-lost woman, reports her to the police, and gives her DNA. It is impossible now to take her DNA, upload it to some commercial database and find a match, and there would be a 99% chance of a match. The fact is that this case is in Europe, not in the USA. As we know, in the USA, a lot of cases have been solved with the help of such DNA databases. In Europe, commercial databases are against it. Therefore, the solution is literally on the surface, and this is even more frustrating because it would be possible to reach the relatives of the victim with this. But so far, it is not possible. As far as I understand, negotiations are underway with these commercial bases to somehow solve this at the government level. We will keep an eye on it. So we will have to find out the identity of the stranger. In other ways, in the BBC podcast dedicated to this case, experts suggest that her grandparents died during the war. She had no brothers or sisters, so she was ideal for a spy. That's how she could get into Mossad, for example, the Israeli military intelligence. The fact is that there were more female agents there, and it is also known that Mossad agents used the largest number of fake names and passports. Could it be that the woman in Bergen was really tracking war criminals or passing on information about them? History shows that Mossad agents have definitely been to Norway. To confirm or deny this version, we can look at the men with whom the unknown woman met. As it turned out, there were several of them. For example, in one of the hotels in Bergen, the woman was seen with a man of Scandinavian appearance, and this is what the waitress Lillian, who served them, says. It didn't look like a date. The couple was mostly silent. The mood was not festive. She had sad eyes. She looked very serious. Another woman, the owner of a furniture store in Stavanger, saw a stranger with a dark-haired man. They spoke in a language she did not understand, and then they had a fight. Here's what the store owner had to say about it. She came in with a dark-haired man, wanted to buy a mirror. They couldn't decide on the size of the mirror for a long time, but they finally chose it. It wasn't big, and it wasn't expensive, maybe the cheapest one in the store at the time. They weren't friendly either, even among themselves. But the most interesting story was told by a man named Ketil Kversøy, who saw this woman in the mountains, not far from the Isdalen Valley. She was climbing the mountains and he was coming down. According to him, at this time of year, October, November, it is very rare to see tourists in the mountains. Mostly only locals walk there at this time. So Ketil saw the stranger 5 days before her death, and the most interesting thing is that she was not alone. There were 2 men behind her, and they were not dressed for the weather. Here is what he said. I wondered why these people were coming up here. It's very strange. I've been walking here for a couple of hours, and I haven't met anyone yet. She looked at me very sharply. Her eyes looked scared. When she came closer, it seemed to me that she wanted to say something but couldn't dare. Then she looked back. There were 2 men, and I realized that she knew they were following her. As we remember, Ketil met the woman a week before her death, so the question arises as to why the men and the woman had to go there twice. To hand over important documents? To discuss something without witnesses? Or maybe they planned to kill her the first time. But since Ketil saw them, they were forced to postpone this operation and lure the woman into the mountains again. We will probably never know the answers to these questions. Despite the fact that there were so many witnesses, none of those men were ever found. Maybe they were not looking for them. All of them, like the stranger, remained only in memories. They knew who she was and what her fate was, and all this time they remained silent, and they continue to be silent. What are they hiding? To this day, flowers are rarely brought to her grave, and a small wooden cross has even been placed at the place where the woman was found, and perhaps someday the white zinc coffin will be sent back to her homeland. But for this, the woman needs to be given her real name back, because somewhere there is someone who knew her, if not close relatives, then at least one of her friends, if not friends, then enemies. That's the story, friends. Write your thoughts in the comments, and I can only thank you for watching this video to the end. I hope that you liked it and will send it to your friends. You can also watch other videos on my channel. There are a lot of interesting things there. Thank you, friends, and see you soon.